Hi, my name is Deepshika Banerjee. I'm based here in St. Louis, Missouri, and welcome to, I believe this is our fifth module in the micro course Introduction to Neuroscience, Sensation, Perception, Learning, and Memory. Now, this sounds like a lot, but it's gonna blend in together to make a little bit more sense as to show how they're all a cohesive unit. So, we're gonna cover a few different things in this module. First, we'll be understanding sensations and perceptions, exploring the five senses, learning how brain processes sensory information, discover how learning changes the brain, and explain how memories are formed and stored. Now, there's a common debate that comes up in neuroscience, and that's sensation versus perception. Sensation, by definition, is the detection of stimuli by sensory receptors. Perception is the brain's interpretation of the sensory data. So, sensation provides the raw information from the environment. Perception gives that sensory information meaning it's our interpretation of it. And that's why perception is seen as such a variable thing, because it's severely influenced by our experiences, our level of attention, and our personal expectations of what the sensations should or should not be. Now, common sensations stem from our five senses. Vision detects light through our eyes. Hearing detects sound through the ears. Taste detects pressure, temperature, pain, and vibration. Taste detects dissolved chemicals on the tongue, and smell detects airborne chemicals in the nose. And how we sense those is through a process called sensory receptions. Sensory receptors convert stimuli into electrical signals. Sensory neurons then carry signals to the spinal cord and the brain. Therefore, this is part of the afferent system. Within the peripheral nervous system. The thalamus then relays most sensory information to the cerebral cortex. Depending on what the information is, this more often tends to be between the parietal and occipital lobes. And then different brain regions process different sensory inputs. Again, it depends on what the sensory input is. More often than not, it is the parietal or the occipital lobe. Then the brain combines the information from these multiple senses. After the sensory process, we go into perception, and perception is deeply rooted into what we pay attention to. So attention is basically the process of selecting important information for processing. So within the information that is being sensed, the brain then, based on our attention, selects what part of the information we will be processing and in what order. The brain will filter out all irrelevant stimuli to allow for it to hone in on that specific thing. And expectations then go on to influence that perception. Perception can also be affected by visual and auditory illusions like the one shown on the side. Selective attention for optical illusions and alike helps prevent information overload. That's why in optical or auditory illusions, people will hear one thing over another, instead of another, or before something else. Next, let's understand learning and neuroplasticity and how this connects. So learning produces changes in neural connections, right? And neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize throughout life. So it is quite literally the ability to change our neural connections. Repeated practice strengthens our neural pathways, which is why spaced repetition is actually seen to be such an effective study technique. And new experiences tend to modify existing brain circuits. This is where neuroplasticity steps in. So it helps in learning, recovery, and adaptation as a whole. However, perception, as we saw, is extremely memory dependent because that's what sets our expectations. And learning is also extremely memory dependent because this relies on our long and short-term memory alike. So in order to better understand these two, we have to understand memory. There are different kinds of memory. We have sensory memory. This lasts a few milliseconds to seconds. This is what we talk about when we're talking about sensory reception within the afferent pathway. Then there's short-term or working memory. This is what temporarily holds and manipulates information. So, reference to a strong short-term or working memory will sometimes be for actors who are picking up on new techniques. For example, Anya Taylor-Joy, when she was learning chess techniques for Queen's Gambit, she'd be shown the maneuver 10 to 15 minutes before the scene would be recorded. Then they'd run the scene, and then she would forget the uh, chess maneuver as a whole. That is a very strong example of her working memory. Then we have long term memory. This is what stores information for extended periods of time. So, for example, in math class, when students are learning everything from the beginning, say number logic and geometry, and eventually that knowledge builds and stays for a long time so that they can recall it in higher level classes such as topology and such. That would be an example of their long term memory. Long term memory also is split into explicit and implicit memories. So, an explicit memory is something that requires conscious effort to remember. So, when anything you study, really, and implicit memory is something that doesn't require conscious effort to remember. So, these are things like blinking, breathing. We don't need to remember doing it, but if our memory serves right, yes, I was blinking during this moment, or yes, I was breathing during this moment. However, as it can be seen, memory formation is an extremely complex process. It requires the limbic system, the CNS and the PNS working together, our cerebral cortex, our corpus callosum, and so it's involving multiple brain regions. A few brain structures involved in memory creation is mainly the limbic area, along with the prefrontal area. So the main area is the hippocampus. It helps to form new long-term memories. Then we have the prefrontal cortex that supports working memory and decision making. Our amygdala strengthens our emotional memories, and the cerebellum contributes to motor skill learning. So these are things like writing, dance, swimming, cycling, and etc. Long-term memories become distributed across the cerebral cortex, though, depending on what kind of memory it is. Now, while we're on the topic of memory, memory loss and improvement are a huge topic of discussion, especially because forgetting is not just a normal part of life, but a normal part of memory processing as well. More often than not, when learning content to students, we forget things and then relearn them. Uh, so, a few ways to improve memory would be through sleep, as mentioned in a few previous modules. Sleep really helps to consolidate new memories. Regular review strengthens long term retention and potentiation. Physical exercise supports brain health and cognition. And active learning improves memory more than passive review, as is explained through Feynman's technique. So, in summary, this module covers a few different things. We understand that sensation detects information from the environment. Perception gives sensory information meaning. Learning changes neural connections through neuroplasticity. Memory involves multiple brain systems. And healthy habits improve learning and memory alike.